I want to talk to you guys today about the importance of sexual continence. Now, this is a very important topic that doesn't get talked to, in my opinion, in depth in mainstream media, in mainstream conversations, but it's something that's very, very, very important, especially from the male perspective. Now, of course, I'm talking from the perspective of a married man, but this really applies to really all men, all developing males in general. Sexual continence is important. Let me put it to you in a broad way. It's important that you save your sexual energy, literally, that you save it for procreation, you save it for your wife, and that is it. And I know that sounds restrictive, but this is what God intended. It's in the Bible. Hebrews 13:4, where God specifically commands to not defile the marriage bed because he will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. And it's not a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It's not a bunch of weird stuff. The proof is in the pudding. And modern society, and it's happened several times really throughout the history of humanity, but especially in our modern society, have you ever noticed how everything, or almost everything, seems to be about sex? I mean, it's always just pushed and shoved in your face. You watch a movie and TV show, and the characters are constantly plotting and scheming how they can get laid and how they can engage in promiscuity. If you watch a lot of the shows that I did growing up, and I didn't understand it at the time, but even shows like, I'll give you a good example. If you ever watched the show Friends, obviously one of the most popular shows, sitcoms of modern times, and how the constant push of sex and promiscuity, they put a laugh track behind it, they put some jokes behind it. And if you're not paying attention, you think that, oh, there's no harm in it. But if you look back at the makeup of the show, it was constantly about this pursuit of, I'll just call it what it is, sexual immorality, and how it's normalized. And I even noticed in movies that I watched, growing up, a lot of those coming of age teen films, and the main purpose of them were they were conquest films where the main characters were a bunch of young men. Think about what I'm saying here. A bunch of young men, usually still of college age and oftentimes in high school age, trying to be promiscuous, trying to get laid. Now just think about that. Even though they were portrayed by adults in most cases, they have the actor be somebody in their early 20s, but they're acting like kids trying to engage in promiscuous acts. Let me repeat that. They were promoting underage promiscuity. Are you connecting the dots I'm saying here? In other words, a lot of these movies, films, sitcoms that we watched growing up that were normalizing premarital sexual activity, they were aiming it at kids. Are you putting two and two together yet? The point I'm trying to make here is that it tried to start you from an early age, literally from childhood, from not being fully developed, that all this promiscuity is okay. And you see it, and it's no wonder nowadays there's so much propaganda about kids, literal kids, getting their bodies mutilated and having transitional things done to their hormones and all of these things. And you notice how they're trying to make it more and more normalized. Whereas 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it wasn't like that. But the messaging was being planted. And you see nowadays it's spread more like a wildfire Again, not the first time in history, but it's more noticeable and prevalent now with social media and all this technology that we have to spread information, true or false, that it's all about sex. That's all you hear. That's all you see. All about sex. Everything. You see it on commercials, just regular commercials. You'll be sitting there on a Sunday afternoon watching football or watching basketball with your family, with your kids. It's a commercial where, somebody, some woman is, scantily dressed or something like that, or some guy has his shirt off and they're trying to push some product. And usually the product doesn't have any relevance to you being naked or half naked. It'll be a commercial for gum or for Doritos or something like that. And it constantly gets pushed. And this has been going on for a long time, but if you really pay attention, it's been the subtlety has been dwindling. And getting back to what I was saying is everything seems to be about sex. It's all about sexual liberalism and sexual expression and sexual fluidity and gender fluidity. And all these messages are just being pumped into your veins, into the person that's not discerning or think that it is innocent or think that nobody is coming after your kids or your sexual continence. You are sadly mistaken. So getting back to my main point here is your sexual continence, your vitality is important. As a man, again, you should be saving yourself for within your marriage, period, and point blank. There's no exception to the rule. And you shouldn't be making loopholes. Here's what I mean by loopholes. Pornography. You can't do it. You can't indulge in it. Period and point blank. The reason being is it's a form of adultery. Again, it's a form of trying to find a loophole. And I'm surprised, but also not surprised of how many men I see walking around, married or otherwise, and you can tell that they're wasting and using up their sexual continence on pornography. So whether they're doing the deed to it or whether they're just watching it or whatever, you can see it in their actions, their demeanors, their eyes, their posture, their vitality. And I know this firsthand because it's something that I used to watch. I'll just come out and admit it, for years. And I stopped in my early 20s when I realized, and thank the Lord, at such a young age, I wish I had never saw it, looked at it ever in my life. I realized at a very young age that this is something that is not normal. Because what it does is when you attack your sexual continence, meaning that you indulge, you try to find loopholes, whether it be engaging in promiscuous activity, whether it be viewing adult material, whether it be going to strip clubs, prostitution, whatever it might be, when you indulge in it, what you're doing is you're taking away your energy, your vigor, your pursuit of a lot of things that either benefit society or benefit your general well-being. Again, the proof is in the pudding. If you think about it, a lot of men have achieved great things and wonderful things when they took their energy that they focused on, for lack of a better term, getting laid, and they used it to create things, to come up with ideas, inventions, things to better society. Just on a smaller scale, I'm sure most of you are familiar with fighters, UFC fighters, boxers, etc., that abstain from sexual activity for weeks or even months when they're training for a big fight. We've heard the old adage from, of course, from the movie Rocky. You remember Mickey telling Rocky when he's training to not mess around with women. Women weaken legs, as the old saying goes. People think that's just a myth or that's just a bunch of voodoo, but it's true. That vitality that you have for being sexually continent is energy that can be used to do great things. It's also within a man's biology, and you can do the research about this, you can deep dive into this, but it's also within a man's biology to, once he does the deed, in other words, when he gives up his own intimate sexual continence, when he releases, that he's finished. Your body is basically telling you that, hey, I've done my job, I've done the deed, I've done whatever I need to create another human being, be fruitful, and multiply. Men, you'll notice, most men, there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, men, if you notice that when you finish release, you just want to chill, maybe go to sleep, grab something to eat, or whatever, that's not coincidence. It's your body basically turning down the volume, shutting down your ambition, because that pursuit to continue and pass your image on to the next generation, pass on the image of God, you've done your deed. So what I'm trying to say is, it's not right for a man to constantly be doing it day after day, multiple times a day, and especially not in a wasteful way, meaning to adult material, explicit material, promiscuity, prostitutes, one night stand, promiscuous, sexually fluid nature. That is, I shouldn't say nature, but actions. That is not what you should be doing. Again, the proof is in the pudding. Try it yourself. If you're somebody who's been engaging in a lot of sexually indulgent, promiscuous behavior, take a break for a while, 2 weeks, a month. And the first thing is, if you tell yourself that that's too hard and I simply can't do it, you've already outed yourself and said that you have a problem, because you've created an idol. And an idol is anything that has authority and final say over your life that's not God. And an idol can come in many ways. It can be an addiction to bad food. It could be an addiction to sugary sweets, alcohol, drugs. In the case of what I'm talking about now, pornography, sexual indulgence. But if it dictates how you do your day, in other words, you map your other activities around it, it's a problem. And if the thought of not having it for a few days or a week or a couple weeks makes you a little bit worried and concerned, it's probably an idol. It most likely is. You'll notice that several times throughout scripture that fasting is done, and oftentimes it's not forced or required. It's done because the fasting entity, the fasting party, person, or whatever, is trying to get closer to God in deep, fervent prayer, because they have a need that needs addressed. And thereby going the indulgent physical necessity in order to connect closer to the spiritual. So that's why fasting is important. It's a good reset, I will say, to get away from what could potentially be an idol. But getting off on a little bit of a tangent, going back to the whole sexual continence thing. Again, like I said, there's a lot of messaging out there on TV shows and media, video games, music. And it's been going on for a long time, to where, hey, have as much sex as you want with anyone you want, whoever you want, whatever gender you want, regardless of your marriage, your relationship, your own chastity, your own energy. Just do it, because that's the only pursuit. And then you've got, what you see now is a lot of men in modern society that lack ambition, that lack purpose, that lack work ethic. They go to a job and they don't like it, and then they quit 2 weeks later because they don't have the energy for it. Instead of working their way up the ladder or having pursuits, men stop putting the same effort into pursuing the woman that is right for them, a righteous, biblically sound, God-fearing woman, and they just go for whoever they can get because they have no self-esteem or low self-esteem because they wasted all their energy for lack of sexual continence. or they mess with prostitutes, or they go look at pornography, or they do what's called nowadays being a simp, and they bow down and do whatever to appease to a woman, regardless of her character or her nature. She might be promiscuous, whatever, but guys don't want to be lonely and they want to put pelts on their wall, so to speak, and so they give in to anything. They just give in to, let me just buy her stuff and buy her clothes and pay her bills and all this stuff, and they basically become a slave to a woman because either they're so lonely or desperate or they have no self-esteem. Is because they've been wasting all of their energy because society's told them that you're nobody unless you're promiscuous and getting laid. Okay, unless you have a high body count, then you're not important. And usually when there's a mainstream narrative that's not getting fought back on and everyone's just going with the flow, guys, that is a perfect time to really dig in, do your research, and ask yourself, is this true or is there something deeper to it? In other words, if something is a little too comfortable, you should be concerned, because ultimate comfort and bliss is not realistic. Even Jesus says, John 16:33, that in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I, meaning Jesus, have overcome the world. What does that mean? Is that you can get through anything with God, but make no mistake, if God himself says that you will have trouble in this world, believe me, you will. And if you're living life and you don't have any trouble, any conflict, any circumstances that are a little bit uneasy, something's wrong. Something is really, really wrong. I just know in a baseline level, even if you're not a Christian, you should have a moral base. Let me just say this disclaimer. You should have a moral base and be following the word of God. But even if you're not, at the grand scheme of things, if your life is a little too focused on comfort, all you want to do is chill and relax, and you have really no ambition, something is clearly wrong. But going back to what I said about sexual continence, again, be careful with that. Guys, save yourself for your wife. Save your release for your wife so that you can be fruitful and multiply, retain that energy and vigor. People are going to think that I'm crazy, that I'm some kind of a wacko, but I don't care. There is nothing normal about constantly releasing, pumping it out, and having, a huge harem of women, whatever it might be, having a bunch of booty calls. That's not normal behavior. It's actually, if you really look at it, it's creepy. It's gross. It's disgusting. And it's keeping you down from your ultimate pursuits. You want to look at somebody who had as much sexual promiscuity as anyone in history? Look at King Solomon. Read the book of Ecclesiastes sometime. King Solomon, who had, I always get the numbers mixed up, if it was 300 wives and 700 concubines or 700 wives and 300 concubines. The point I'm trying to make is he had 1,000 women at his disposal. So you want to talk about somebody who was sexually indulgent? The richest man who ever lived in recorded history, the most indulgent man promiscuity-wise in history, had 1,000 women. And if you read the book in Ecclesiastes, said everything, it's all in vain. Everything is in vain. It's a chasing after the wind. So the person who had the most sexual gratification was still unfulfilled, probably wasting his seed constantly. And if you read about Solomon and how he eventually was turned into false gods by the women that he married, he was turned to foreign gods by the women he married, and he lost his connection with the Lord. It was all about promiscuity. Literally, he had the equivalent of Googling a bunch of adult material. He had the ancient biblical equivalent to that in the flesh, with being the richest person ever, and it still wasn't enough. So what does that tell you, regular person, average Joe, who is wasting your time staring at a screen, staring at a computer screen, looking at a bunch of naked pixelated women, or trying to get as many one night stands and booty calls, and wasting this vital essence that is used to create life and pass the image of God down to the next generation? What does that look like if you're just wasting it, on some harlot? You're just wasting it, into a tissue or something like that. So really think about sexual continence, and really think about, if you're somebody who indulges in that, how it's potentially wasting your energy, how it's wasting your time, how it's wasting your body's ability to exert itself and operate at peak level. And even if you think that you're already operating cool, calm, and collected and living that lifestyle, just try it for a little while. Like I said earlier in the video, try it for a week, 2 weeks, and try to not indulge in some goofy behavior where everything is about sex, and see if it doesn't benefit you. All right, that's all I gotta say, guys. Peace.